The third week of October, on the rain-dark stones of the assembly room at Halverston, a duchess in grey silk and old diamonds looked down at a small brass locket lying open in a working girl's palm, and the color left her face the way water leaves a tilted cup. She did not cry out, she did not speak. She put one gloved hand against the back of a chair, and then the chair was not enough, and Octavia, Dowager Duchess of Halverston, who had buried a husband, and outlived 2 arguments with the crown, and never once given the room the satisfaction of seeing her falter, went down in a slow grey fold among the candle smoke and the silence. Clarissa did not move. The locket was still warm from her own hand. Around her the assembled gentry of 3 parishes held a single breath, and she understood before she understood anything else that whatever this small object was, it was not small, and that her life had just divided itself into the hours before this and the hours that would come after. She closed her fingers over it. You will want to know how a girl who mixed tinctures for a living came to be standing in that room at all, holding a thing that could lay a duchess on the floor. So did she. The answer began 6 weeks earlier in a town she had never expected to leave, on a morning that smelled of seaweed and wood smoke and the particular green bitterness of the herbs drying in the rafters above her head. Clarissa Bligh was 24 years old, and she had spent 11 of those years in the dispensary of Mr. Gray. Pemberton, apothecary, on the steep main street of Trevena, where the houses leaned toward one another over the cobbles as though sharing a secret. She had come to him at 13, an orphan of the parish with quick hands, and a memory that held the weight of a powder the way other girls held the words of a song, and he had kept her because she was useful and stayed because she became indispensable. She knew the difference between feverfew and chamomile by smell in the dark. She knew how many grains of one tincture would ease a cough and how many would stop a heart, and she knew which neighbors could pay and which could not, and she settled their accounts in her own neat hand without ever being told to be kind. The town had a word for her, and the word was nobody, not cruelly. Trevena was not a cruel place. She had no family that anyone could name, no portion, no claim, on any of the great houses that sat along the cliffs with their backs to the sea and their faces to the carriage road. She was the apothecary's girl. When the gentry came down from their estates to buy their lavender water and their gout salts, they spoke over her head as though she were a fixture of the room, a shelf, a jar. Lady Sophronia Dacre, who came down from the heights above the town with her maid to be measured for tonics she did not need, had said it to that maid once. Plainly, with Clarissa standing not 3 feet off, one need not lower one's voice before a shop girl. They do not hear themselves spoken of that sort. Clarissa had gone on weighing the powder, and had not looked up. She had learned not to mind. She had learned a great many things by learning not to mind. She had a mother once. She knew that much. The way one knows the shape of a thing one has never seen, by the hole it leaves. She had been left at the parish on a winter night, with nothing but the clothes she wore and a name spoken once to the woman who took her in, and the woman had died of the fever the following spring, and so the name had gone with her into the ground. Clarissa did not know whose daughter she was. She had stopped asking before she was old enough to spell the question. What she did not yet know was that the answer had been walking the roads of the county for 19 years, in the boots of a broken old man, waiting to find her. The first time the Earl of Wardenscliffe came into the shop, it was raining, and he did not take off his hat. She heard the bell before she saw him, and she heard the cane before the bell had finished, the hard, particular knock of a man who put more of his weight on it than he wished anyone to notice. He filled the low doorway, and had to bow his head to come through it, and the rain came in with him, and ran off the dark wool of his coat onto Mr. Pemberton's clean boards. He was perhaps 35, broad through the shoulder in the way of a man who had once been broader, with dark hair gone iron at the temple, and a jaw set like something carved before the carver had decided to make it kind. His eyes were gray, the gray of the sea under cloud, and they moved over the shelves and the scales and the drying herbs, and at last over her, and they did not warm and they did not soften and they did not look away as quickly as they should have. I am told the apothecary keeps a preparation of laudanum measured honestly, he said. His voice was low and level, a voice that did not raise itself because it had never needed to. I am told he does not water it, and does not sell more than a man requires. He does not, Clarissa said. Neither do I. She did not curtsy. She would think of it afterward, and not know why. He looked at her a moment longer, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not a smile, and was perhaps the memory of where a smile had once been kept, and he set a coin on the counter and named the smallest quantity she sold. The smallest, he said, and no more. I do not intend to need it. I intend to refuse it. She understood him then, or thought she did. She had seen the wound men brought back from Spain and Portugal, the ones that did not show. She had seen the way some of them disappeared into the brown bottle, a grain at a time until there was nothing left but the wanting. He had named the smallest measure, not because he could not afford more, but because he meant to fight, and the smallness was the fight. Then I will sell you the smallest, she said, and when you have refused it long enough, you will not need to come back. For a moment, she thought she had given offense. His jaw tightened. Then he inclined his head. The smallest courtesy, the kind a man gives an equal. And he took his bottle and his cane and went back out into the rain. And Mr. Plus. Pemberton came up from the cellar with dust on his sleeves and said, "Do you know who that was?" And she said that she did not, and he told her, and she went on grinding the powder in front of her as though the name had not landed in the room like a dropped stone. The Earl of Wardenscliffe came again the following week. He did not need to. A footman could have fetched a bottle of laudanum and saved his master the long wet road down from the park. He came himself, and he came on the day she was alone in the shop, and she would wonder later how he had known which day that was. This time he stayed. He looked at the books open on the counter, the careful columns of who owed what and who had been forgiven it, and he asked her a question about a tincture, and she answered it fully. And he asked her another, harder one, the kind a man asks to find the bottom of a thing, and she answered that too. He learned in 20 minutes that she could read Latin off the labels of the old jars, and that she kept the accounts, and that she had set the broken finger of the blacksmith's boy when the bone setter was 3 valleys away and drunk. He did not praise her. He filed each thing away behind those sea-gray eyes, with the care of a man counting coins he did not mean to spend. And when he left, he forgot to be cold for the length of one sentence at the door. "You should not be here," he said. "I have nowhere else to be, my lord." "That," he said, "is not the same thing." And he was gone before she could decide whether she had been insulted or seen. He came every week after that. The town began to notice, in the way a small town notices everything and says half of it. Mrs. Goss, who kept house at the park, and came down on Fridays for the household physic, told Clarissa plainly over the counter that his lordship had not gone willingly into a room with a stranger since he came home from the war with that leg, and the news that his younger brother had died of a fever at Halverston, while he bled in a field abroad. He had loved that brother. He had come home to bury a name and a future, and had shut himself in the park with his pain and his pride, and he went nowhere, and he saw no one. And yet here he was, every Friday, in a chemist's shop, asking a working girl about the dosing of willow bark. "He is not warm with you," Mrs. Goss said, watching her face. "I have seen him not be warm with everyone. There is a difference in it. I do not think you have noticed." Clarissa had noticed. She had noticed the way he stood when he stood at her counter, with his weight off the bad leg without seeming to favor it, so that she would not see him hurt. She had noticed that he had stopped buying the laudanum 3 visits ago and bought willow bark instead, the harder cure, the slower one, and that he had not told her he had done it, but had let her see the receipt and read the meaning for herself. She had noticed the body before she let herself notice the rest, because the body was safer, and because a girl with no portion and no name learns early which things are hers to want and which are not, and an earl was not. She did not in those weeks know that she would be standing in a duchess's assembly room before the leaves were down. She knew only that on Fridays the bell would ring, and the cane would knock, and the doorway would darken, and that she had begun, against every sense she possessed, to listen for it. The beggar came on a Tuesday. It was the worst weather of the autumn. A wind off the sea that drove the rain sideways and emptied the street, and the bell rang late in the afternoon with a sound so weak she thought at first it was the wind. The man who fell through the door was not a man so much as the ruin of one, soaked to the bone, gray in the face, his coat a thing of patches, and his boots tied with twine, and he came 2 steps into the warmth, and put his hand against the counter, and went down onto his knees on the boards. She was around the counter before she had thought about it. She knew death. She had sat with enough of the parish in their last hours to know its smell and its color, and this man had brought both into the room with him. His lips were blue. His breath came in long, shallow draws with too much space between them. She got an arm under him and could not move him, and called for Mr. Pemberton, and remembered Mr. Saliban. Pemberton was 3 streets away at the curate's bedside, and so it was only the 2 of them. The dying man and the girl, in the herb-smelling dark, with the rain hammering the glass. "Be still," she told him. "Be still. I have you. I am going to ease you." She measured what she could into a spoon, the strong cordial, the thing that did not cure but eased, and she got it past his lips, and for a moment his breathing steadied and his eyes opened and found her face, and they were not the eyes of a beggar. That was the thing she would remember. The face was ruined, and the clothes were rags and the boots were tied with twine, but the eyes that found hers were clear and gray and old with a particular grief, and they looked at her the way a man looks, at the answer to a question he has carried so long he has forgotten he is still asking it. "It is you," he said. "Hush," she said. "Save your breath. There is no more to save." He smiled, and it was a terrible smile, gentle and finished. His hand came up from beneath the wet coat, and it was not empty. 19 years, he said. "I have looked since the winter she died. They told me you had gone with her. They lied. They lie about everything, that house. Take it." He pressed the thing into her palm, and closed her fingers over it with both his hands, and his hands were ice. It was a locket, brass gone soft and brown with handling, warm only because he had carried it against his body. She tried to give it back. He would not take it. "Your mother's," he said. "Open it when you are alone. Show it to no one until you know what it is worth, and then show it to the one who fainted, and let the whole county watch her do it." His grip tightened, urgent, the last strength he had spent on this. "Her name was Roselle. Remember the name Roselle. You have her mouth. I knew you the moment you turned around." "Whose mother?" she said. "Whose? Tell me your name. Tell me what house." He gave her no answer. The long spaces between his breaths had become one space, and it did not end. And the clear gray eyes went on looking at her face as though they were satisfied at last to have somewhere to rest, and the rain went on against the glass. And she knelt on the boards of the only home she had ever known with a dead man's head against her shoulder and a cold piece of brass burning in her closed hand. She did not open it that night. She was not certain why. Perhaps because the man had told her to open it alone, and she did not trust herself to be alone enough. Perhaps because some animal part of her understood that as long as it stayed shut, her life could stay the size it had always been. She washed the dead man, and laid him out with her own hands. And Mr. Bann. Pemberton came home, and they sent for the parish to bury him, and no one knew his name, and no one claimed him. And he went into the ground at the edge of the churchyard under a wooden marker that said only a stranger, and the word Roselle she kept to herself like a coal in her mouth. She opened the locket 3 days later, on her knees by the one candle in her attic room, with the wind quiet for once and the sea a long breathing in the dark. Inside, behind a film of greasy glass, was a miniature, no larger than her thumbnail, a young woman in a pale gown, fair-haired, painted with the careless skill of an expensive hand, and the young woman had Clarissa's mouth. Not a little. Not a resemblance a hopeful eye might invent. The same mouth, the same set of it, the faint downturn at the corner that her own glass showed her every morning. Opposite the miniature, coiled under a second film of glass, was a lock of fair hair tied with a thread and pressed flat beneath it, so small she nearly missed it. A sliver of paper folded to the size of a fingernail. She worked it loose with the point of a needle. On it, in a fine, faded hand, were 8 words. "To my daughter, that she may know herself." She did not sleep. She sat with the candle until it drowned in its own wax, turning the 8 words over, and the name Roselle, and the miniature with her own mouth, and she understood that the old man had not been raving. Somewhere there had been a woman named Roselle, with this face, who had written those words to a child, and the child had been left at a parish on a winter night to die, and had not died, and was sitting now in an attic above an apothecary's shop, with her mother's face in her hand. Show it to the one who fainted. He had said there was only one house in the county that could make a duchess faint. She had heard the name from Mrs. Goss often enough. Halverston. The house where the Earl of Wardenscliff's brother had died. The house with the Dowager Duchess in it, grey and proud and old. She did not go to Halverston. She was not a fool. A working girl does not walk up to a duke's door with a brass locket and a story. She did, instead, the one thing she knew how to do, which was to find out, carefully, the way she found out the cause of a fever before she treated it. And the man she trusted enough to ask was the man who came on Fridays. When she told the Earl of Wardenscliff, she did not show him the locket. She told him only that an old man had died in the shop with a name on his lips, and asked, as though idly, whether he had ever known of a lady named Roselle connected to the house at Halverston. She watched his face when she said it. She had learned to read that face by then, the small country of it. And she saw the name, land in it, like a stone, into still water. He was quiet a long time. The shop was empty, and the afternoon was going gold at the windows, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. "There is a Lady Roselle," he said. She was the Duke's daughter. The old Duke, the present Dowager's husband. She was the beauty of the county. The year I was a boy. She made what they called a low marriage against her father's will, to a man with no fortune, and the family put her out of the house, and out of the family Bible, and out of memory. They said she died of a fever within the year, she and the child she was carrying. There was no funeral. There was nothing. The Dowager forbade her name to be spoken. He looked at Clarissa, and the gray eyes had something in them she had not seen there before, a kind of careful dread. "Why do you ask me this?" "Because the old man who died in my shop," she said, "told me her name was Roselle. And he told me I had her mouth. She had not meant to say it. It came out of her before her caution could stop it, and once it was said it could not be unsaid, and she watched the Earl of Wardenscliff look at her mouth, truly look at it, with the attention of a man checking a thing against a memory, and she watched his face change. "Show me," he said. So she did. She took the locket from the cord at her neck where she had kept it against her skin since the night she opened it, and she put it into his hand, and he opened it, and for a long moment he did not breathe at all. He looked at the miniature, and he looked at her, and he looked at the miniature again, and his thumb moved over the 8 words on the slip of paper, with a tenderness she had not known his hands contained. "I saw her once," he said. "I was a boy of 10, and she came to the church at Wardenscliff for a christening, and the whole congregation turned to look at her. This is her face." He closed the locket as though closing a wound. "Clarissa, do you understand what you are holding?" It was the first time he had spoken her given name. She would think of that afterward, that the first time he said it was the moment her whole life turned over, as though the name and the truth had arrived together. She shook her head, though she had begun to understand and was afraid of the understanding. "If this is her child," he said, "and you did not die, then you are the granddaughter of a duke. And the woman who told the county that you had died, and put your mother out to die alone, and has had 19 years of quiet because of it, is a duchess who is still very much alive. And she has every reason in the world to make certain you do not exist. What he did not say, because he was a careful man, was that he had already decided to stand between her and that reason. She would learn that later. She knew only that he took the locket and turned it in the light, and said, in the level voice he used for things that mattered most, "You will not do this alone. Whatever you do, you will not do it alone." Why? And she, who had done everything alone for 24 years, found that she could not answer him because her throat had closed. The dowager learned of the locket within the week. Clarissa never knew exactly how. Perhaps a servant talked. Perhaps the Reverend Varian, the curate, who had buried the stranger, and to whom she had gone with her careful questions about the old parish registers, had mentioned it in the wrong hearing. She learned, however. It traveled because the machinery of a great house reaches everywhere, and the machinery began at once to move. The first thing that happened was that a man came to the shop while she was out and asked Mr. Shaw Pemberton a great many questions about his assistant, her habits, her history, and whether she had lately come into possession of any object of value. Mr. Pemberton, who trusted no one in a good coat, who asked questions about his Clarissa, told the man nothing, and told Clarissa everything. The second thing that happened was worse. A constable came down from the direction of Halverston, with a paper in his hand, and the paper said that a brass locket, set with a miniature, the property of the Halverston estate, had been stolen, and that one Clarissa Bligh, apothecary's assistant, was suspected of the theft. She understood then what she was facing. The dowager had not denied the locket. That would have been the mistake of a frightened woman, and the dowager was not frightened. She was furious, and she was clever, and she had taken the one true thing in Clarissa's possession and turned it into the instrument of her ruin. If the locket was stolen property, then Clarissa was a thief, and a thief's word was worth nothing, and her mother's face, and her mother's name, and the 8 written words could all be locked away in a magistrate's strong-box as evidence, and never seen again. To my daughter, that she may know herself, made into proof of a crime. It was very well done. Clarissa, who admired competence wherever she found it, even in the hand at her own throat, understood that she was up against a person who had been winning quietly for the better part of 2 decades, and did not intend to lose now. She did not run, though Mr. Pemberton begged her to. She did the thing she always did. She found out. The constable could not arrest her yet. The magistrate was the Reverend Varian's cousin and a fair man, and he would not take a girl on a duchess's bare word without a hearing. The dowager wanted the hearing public. That was her error, though it did not look like one. She wanted Clarissa exposed and discredited before the whole county. At the autumn assembly at Halverston, the great gathering, where 3 parishes came to dance and dine, and settle their precedents for the year, because the dowager understood that a verdict delivered before that audience could never be undone by any later quiet truth. She would crush the girl in the one arena where the county's judgment was made. Mrs. Goss carried the word down from the park with a face like a closed door, having heard the dowager say it to her steward over the breakfast china. A shop girl with a trinket and a tail. I will have her named for what she is, in front of the whole county, and then she may go back to her jars. Clarissa heard the sentence repeated in Mrs. Goss's careful voice and did not flinch at it, and the not flinching cost her more than a flinch would have. She did not consider, the dowager, that the same arena would hold every witness Clarissa might ever need. In the days before the assembly, Clarissa worked. She went to the Reverend Varian and asked to see the parish register of marriages for the year her mother would have married, and found, as she had feared, that the page was gone, cut cleanly out with a knife near the spine, an old cut browned at the edge. Someone had been there before her, years before, and had removed the record of Roselle's low marriage, so that the marriage had never legally happened, so that any child of it was no child at all in the eye of the law. She sat with the mutilated book and felt the cold of how thoroughly she had been erased before she was even born. Then the Reverend Varian, an old man with ink on his fingers and a long memory, said a thing that changed everything. There would be a duplicate. he said. In my grandfather's day, the bishop required a second copy of every register sent up to the diocese each Lady Day, the transcripts. They are kept at the cathedral, and no one has looked at them in 40 years. If a marriage was entered here before the page was cut, it was copied up to the diocese before the knife ever touched this book. She understood at once. Whoever had cut the page at Trevina had not known of the duplicate, or had not been able to reach it, and so the record they had so carefully destroyed still existed, untouched in a box in a cathedral muniment room, a day's ride away. The antagonist had guarded one door and left the other standing open, because she had never known the second door was there. There was no time to fetch it herself before the assembly. The Earl of Wardenscliffe, when she told him, did not hesitate. He sent his own steward riding for the cathedral that same night, with a letter under his seal. And he sat with her in the back of the shop in the candlelight, and made her tell him every detail of the old man's death, every word the beggar had spoken, and at the name, Elias, which she had not even remembered the stranger giving until the Earl drew it from her. He went still. "Elias Dunmore," he said softly. "I knew him. He was steward at Halverston in the old Duke's time. He left the year Lady Roselle was put out. The dowager told the county. He had robbed the household and fled, and no one questioned it, and he was never seen again, his hand closed slowly, into a fist on the table. She did not put him out for robbery. She put him out because he knew. He took the child's mother's locket because it was the one proof she could not reach, and he ran with it, and he has spent the years since on the roads keeping it from her, and she has spent those same years calling him a thief so that no one would ever believe a word from his mouth. He looked at Clarissa. He brought it to you. He found you. He died doing it." She thought of the clear gray eyes, in the ruined face, and the boots tied with twine, and the 19 years, and she put her hand over her mouth and wept for a stranger for the first time in her life. The assembly at Halverston was the largest the county had seen in years. Word had gone round, as the dowager intended it should, that there would be a reckoning, that the apothecary's girl had laid claim to the house and would be answered for it, and the gentry came out in their finest to watch a working girl humbled, because such things were entertainment, and because the dowager had let it be known that she expected them. The great assembly room blazed with candles. The dowager sat at its head in gray silk, and the old Halverston diamonds, straight-backed at 70, her face composed into the particular serenity of a woman who has already won. Clarissa came in. Her plainest gown, washed and pressed, with her mother's locket on its cord, beneath the cloth where the cold of it touched her skin. She had no diamonds and no allies of rank and no portion, and she walked the length of that brilliant room under the eyes of 3 parishes, with her chin level and her hands still, and she did not hurry, because she had decided on the road that whatever happened to her here she would not let them see her hurry. Beside the dowager stood the lady the county had long expected the Earl of Wardenscliffe to marry. Lady Sophronia Dacre, fair and cool and certain, who looked at Clarissa as one looks at a stain on a floor, and said, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "So, this is the creature. I had expected something cleverer. She is only a shop girl after all." It was the 3rd time Clarissa had been so named in that affair, and each time the word had been spoken in a different room, and each time it had been meant to settle her, and each time it had failed, because the word had stopped being able to reach her on the night a dying man told her she had her mother's mouth. The dowager rose. The room fell silent. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life needed to. She told the assembly, in measured and regretful tones, that a sad business had brought them together, that a young woman of the town had stolen a piece of family jewelry, and worse, had used it to spin a wicked fiction against an honorable house claiming kinship to the dead. She produced a paper, and a lawyer to swear to it, a settlement deed bearing the old Duke's seal, in which the dowager said his daughter Roselle was named as having died childless and unmarried in the autumn of her disgrace, the family's grief, recorded in the law's own hand. She let the paper be passed and admired. She was very good. Clarissa watched the county's faces turn against her, one by one, and understood that in a moment the constable at the door would step forward, and it would be finished. Then the Earl of Wardenscliffe crossed the room. He had been standing at the back in the navy coat that fit him as no other man's coat fit him, and he came forward through the parting crowd without hurry, his cane silent for once on the boards, and he stopped before the dowager's chair and bowed exactly as much as her rank required, and not 1 degree more. And he said into the held breath of the whole county, the only words he spoke in that room, the words he had carried in his quiet for 3 weeks, and let no one hear until the one arena where they could not be unheard. "This is Lady Roselle's daughter, and I mean to marry her." He did not shout it. He did not explain it. He laid it down level and irrevocable, a name claimed and a future declared in the same breath, and the room made the low sound a room makes when the ground has shifted beneath it. The dowager's serenity cracked at last. "You are deceived," she said, and for the first time her voice had an edge in it. The thin, high edge of a thing under strain. "There is no daughter, the settlement says plainly. The girl is a thief and a liar, and you have let a pretty face make a fool of an earl. The settlement," the earl said, "was written by you and sealed after his death, and says only what you required it to say." He turned, and at the door his steward had come in, dust to the knee, with a flat box under his arm, and behind the steward came the Reverend Varian, and the curate carried in both ink-stained hands a great bound volume with the cathedral's mark upon it. The marriage of Lady Roselle was entered in the register at Trevena in the spring of her disgrace, the earl said, before that page was cut from the book with a knife. The diocese, however, keeps a copy of every register sworn and dated, beyond the reach of any knife in this county. It records the marriage. It records, the following winter, the baptism of a daughter, Clarissa, and the death of the mother 3 days after. The child did not die. The child was carried to the parish at Trevena and left to the mercy of strangers, and the man who could have told the truth of it was driven onto the roads with a thief's name pinned to him so that no one would believe him. His name was Elias Dunmore. He was your steward. He died last month on the floor of an apothecary's shop, having spent the rest of his life bringing this girl the proof of who she is. The Reverend Varian laid the great book open on the table beside the dowager's forged deed, and the county leaned in, and there in the faded sworn hand of 40 years past were the names, the marriage and the baptism, and the burial, in the order the dowager had spent her life, denying. And beside them the brass locket that Clarissa drew at last from beneath her gown and opened and laid upon the page, the painted face, with Clarissa's own mouth looking up at the room and the 8 words on the slip of paper. "To my daughter, that she may know herself." It was then that the dowager looked down at the locket lying open in the working girl's palm, and the color left her face, and the proud straight back gave way, and Octavia, Dowager Duchess of Halverston, went down in a slow gray fold among the candle smoke and the silence. She did not faint from grief, though there was grief in it. She fainted, because in that single object, in the painted mouth and the written words and the sworn book beside her own forgery, the whole 19-year edifice of her quiet had collapsed in an instant, and she had seen it collapse, and she had understood that every soul in 3 parishes had seen it too. What she had built to be permanent had proved to be only secret, and a secret is not the same as a truth, and the difference had just been laid open on a table in front of the county she had ruled. They carried her to a couch, and Clarissa, because she was who she was, went to her. She knelt by the gray silk and felt the thready pulse at the old wrist, and called for water, and loosened the diamonds at the throat, and the county watched the girl. The dowager had tried to bring the dowager back to her senses with the same hands that had eased a dying beggar 3 weeks before. When the old woman's eyes opened, the first thing they found was Clarissa's face above her, her mother's mouth, and the dowager made a small broken sound and turned her head away. "I had a granddaughter," the dowager said. "To no one to the painted ceiling. I told myself she had died. It was easier to have a dead grandchild than a living disgrace. I told it so long I came to believe it." Her hand moved on the silk. Roselle wrote to me. From the town where she was dying, she asked me to take the child. I burned the letter. There was no cruelty left in the room to enjoy this. The county that had come to watch a shopgirl humbled sat in a deep and shamed quiet, because they had been ready, every one of them, to believe the Duchess and despise the girl, and they had seen now what their belief was worth. The dowager was not destroyed. She was something worse for a proud woman and better for the world. She was corrected, in front of everyone, by the truth and by the granddaughter's mercy. And she would live with both. That was the whole of her punishment, and it was enough. Lady Sophronia Dacre had gone from the room. No one saw her leave. The Earl of Wardenscliff came and stood beside Clarissa, where she knelt by the couch, and he did not make a speech, and he did not gloat, and he did not touch her in front of the county. He waited until the old woman had been taken up to her rooms and the assembly had dissolved into 100 low, astonished conversations. And then he offered Clarissa his arm, the formal arm, the public arm, and walked her the length of the room she had walked alone an hour before. And this time, 3 parishes parted before her, not as a thief, but as the granddaughter of their duke. And she felt none of it, because she was looking at the place near the door where an old man's proof had finally been believed. They were married in the spring in the small church at Wardenscliff, where the Earl had once seen Lady Roselle turn and the whole congregation turn with her. Clarissa wore a gown of warm white, and her mother's locket at her throat, and the Reverend Varian read the service, and Mr. Pemberton gave her away with ink still under his nails, and tears he did not trouble to hide. And Mrs. Tess. Goss wept frankly in the second pew. The dowager did not come. She sent instead by her own woman a small velvet box, and in it were the old Halverston diamonds and a note, in a hand grown unsteady, and the note said, only, these were Roselle's by right, and yours by right, and I have no further claim on either. Clarissa did not wear the diamonds. She gave them into Mrs. Stalfter. Goss's keeping and wore the brass locket, because the brass had been carried 19 years against a dying man's heart, and the diamonds had only been kept in a box, and she knew which was worth more. The county said, afterward, that it had always known there was something in the apothecary's girl, that you could see the breeding in her if you looked, that they had said as much for years. The county said a great many things. Clarissa let it. She had learned long ago which things were hers to mind, and which were not, and the county's memory of itself was not hers to correct. She did not stop mixing tinctures. The new Countess of Wardenscliff kept a still room at the park, and a hand in Mr. Deer. Pemberton's shop and the people of 3 parishes came to her with their fevers and their broken fingers the way they always had, and she settled their accounts in her own neat hand and forgave the ones who could not pay. And her husband, who had come to her on Fridays asking about willow bark because he could not think how else to come, watched her work with an expression the county had once believed his face could not make. On an evening late, in their first autumn together with the fire lit, and the sea a long quiet breathing beyond the dark windows, the Earl of Wardenscliff found his wife in the small room at the top of the house, where she kept the things she would not give to anyone. The locket lay open on the mantel where she always kept it, the painted mouth catching the firelight. Beside it, pressed flat under a square of glass, was a single faded flower, a sea pink, the kind that grew in the cracks of the cliff path she had walked all her life, the kind that had been blooming in the wall of the churchyard the day they buried a stranger under a marker that said only what he was, and not who. I had his marker changed, she said without turning. It says his name now, Elias Dunmore, and underneath it, that he was faithful. She touched the cold brass of the locket with one finger. He looked. 19 years. He could have sold it a locket with a miniature. He could have sold it 100 times over and eaten for a year on it. He kept it against his heart. And he died, bringing it to a girl he had never met, because he had promised a dying woman he would put it in her daughter's hand. I think of that. I think of it most days. Her husband came and stood behind her, and he did not speak, because he had learned that she said the truest things into a silence and not into an answer, and after a while he put his hands on her shoulders, the way a man steadies a thing he means to keep, and she leaned back against him, and the fire moved, and the locket caught the light. And the painted mouth that was her mouth went on looking out at the warm room, as though it were, at last, content with where it had come to rest. If the old man's 19 years moved you, stay a moment in that quiet with her, before you go, and remember that worth has a way of being seen at last, even when the seeing comes by the longest road. Thank you for staying until the end. Outside, the wind came off the sea and worried at the cliff path where the sea pinks grew, and inside, the small warm room, a woman who had been nobody, the apothecary's girl, the granddaughter of a duke, the wife of an earl, the keeper of a dead man's faith, stood in the circle of her husband's hands and did not need to be any of those names at all. She was only herself that she might know herself, which was the whole of what her mother had wished for her, and which had taken 19 years, and a stranger's death, and a duchess's fall to arrive, and which had in the end arrived.